Bonjour, everyone. Really great to be here. For the last almost 10 years, my academic life has been taken over by one word, translanguaging. And that was totally unexpected, to be quite honest. When Ophelia Garcia and myself wrote the short book, I probably should be sitting.
Do you think Li Wei should... No, okay, just here? Okay. Sorry.
Is that all right? Yeah, there's a recording going on as well. Yes, we intended to write, in fact, we started as a paper, but of course the first draft was already about 20,000 words, so we decided maybe there is a bit more to say, and it turned into a short book. But it was meant to be a summary, or at least a synthesis, of what was going on in the field of education of bilingual learners, especially minoritized and racialized bilingual learners, bilingual and multilingual learners. Not intended to do anything else. Is it
okay? Okay.
I need to... Yes.
Okay, great.
All right, close up. But of course, it led to a lot more research than we could have done ourselves. One thing we didn't expect is for lots of people to take translanguaging as a language teaching pedagogy or language teaching method. It was never meant to be like that. And we'll hear a lot more discussions on that today, I'm sure. And it wasn't, the concept wasn't invented by us for a start, but it was never intended by anybody to be a language teaching method. That needs to be explained. Although I will be talking about language-related pedagogy and how translanguaging can be used as a pedagogy. The concept of translanguaging is based, nevertheless, on some very well-established facts or arguments that are made by lots of different people. For a start, languages, as we know them, as named, are not simply codes. We all know that. Sociolinguists have been arguing that for a long, long time. It's nothing new, and certainly not our new argument, as it were. The named languages are socio-political constructs, and translanguaging is based on that argument and fact. And the other fact that we all know is there is no such thing as a switch in the bilingual brain that operates between codes or languages. Now, I'm here to deal with translanguaging pedagogy today, and the kind of questions that I'm interested in are the very practical questions I've been asked when I do presentations on the idea of translanguaging. For example, here's one. I teach a linguistically and socially very diverse group of students. I want to encourage them to use their first language or first languages in the classroom, as the principles of translanguaging seem to suggest. But of course, the other pupils in the same class and myself as a teacher don't know these languages. This is a very practical concern, and it doesn't appear to be a particularly efficient or effective way of teaching if I allow all these different languages to be used in a short period of time. And there is another one. As a teacher, I have only 15 minutes per lesson in a typical secondary school, at least in Britain, and I've got to get through a prescribed syllabus. Again, within that short period of time, I've got a pedagogical task to achieve, and I can't possibly allow all the students to exercise or to use their L1s in class. And also, lots of teaching colleagues, practitioners especially, are concerned that they need to get the learners especially those who are not speaking the target language as their first language in the classroom, to a particular threshold in the language of medium instruction or the target language in order to progress in terms of content learning. Now, of course, we made this argument, made this point, that translanguaging isn't simply allowing, in a kind of patronizing way, the learners to use their L1s in the classroom. This is a very simple point we keep making, but of course, people still take it as, translanguaging is simply allowing the learners to use a bit of their first language in the classroom. So this talk, really, I want to very quickly revisit the origin of the concept of translanguaging and the theoretical assumptions that underpin the practices, but many of you know this very well by now. And I want to focus on translanguaging pedagogy, with an emphasis on its applications for inclusion and social justice, which is very high on the agenda, and Jeff and others will be talking about it too. We really want to focus on changing the framing of some key issues for language teachers and language researchers. That's the whole point of translanguaging, really developing a new language or new framing, a new discourse to talk about language education, especially the education of minoritized and racialized bilingual and multilingual learners. Two concepts that I feel very relevant and useful, and I'm going to talk about them today, are co-learning and transpositioning. So I'm going to use two examples of how translanguaging pedagogy through co-learning leads to what I call transpositioning, a fundamental shift in the teachers and, of course, the learners' subjectivity, which is what we want to achieve through translanguaging pedagogy. Now, the idea of translanguaging, this is a quick review of the history. Again, many of you know this very well. Started in the Welsh revitalization programs, the Welsh medium schools. There is no Welsh monolingual, and that's a very, very important fact. Yeah? All Welsh speakers also speak English, and of course many speak other languages. So when Kevin Williams, a very experienced teacher and teacher trainer in Bangor, observed in these Welsh medium schools for language revitalization, not for language teaching as such, but content-based teaching, very much content-based teaching. The teachers would teach in Welsh, but the bilingual pupils quite naturally respond in English because they feel much more comfortable and confident in English and respond to the teaching in Welsh in their preferred language, as it were, or a mixture of the two. And occasionally they will read some material in English. Not everything was available in Welsh, and the idea was to discuss it in these classes, content classes in Welsh. So listening, speaking, reading, and writing was done in either Welsh, I was going to say French, or English, or a mixer. That was the phenomena Kevin Williams observed. Clearly, it was against the school policy, because the school policy of language of instruction was Welsh. And that's the whole point of, well, this is the purpose, or at least the objective set by the school to revitalize their language. But Williams viewed it as a way of maximizing, rather than seeing it as simply against the school policy, but actually positively as a way of maximizing the bilingual's potential in learning. So he wasn't concerned about the language of instruction, as it were. He was more concerned about the language of learning. And it was very much an agentive learner strategy. This was a response by bilingual learners to a monolingual language of instruction policy. The pupils were bilingual, not monolingual, and they lived in a bilingual environment. So the original idea was quite simply, as Ken Williams actually wrote about this, to respect the pupils as who they are. And that's a fundamental principle in education and in teaching, and the basis for the idea of translanguaging in bilingual education. And of course, this was Ken Williams' original word in Welsh, and it was his English supervisor, doctoral supervisor, Colin Baker, who used the word translanguaging. Initially, it wasn't translanguaging, but later on, translanguaging, to introduce it to the English-speaking world through his text book, Foundations of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism, simply by adding trans to the concept of languaging, which has been there for generations, in fact, in both cognitive science and anthropological linguistics. So it started by so translanguaging as a pedagogy or a pedagogical practice, or at least a practice in the classroom, started by bilingual learners. It was a learner initiative, and I really want to emphasize that, out of natural instinct as bilinguals against the imposition of monolingual normative policies by schools and other educational authorities. And Williams' argument was that it would maximize the learner's learning potential. Should teaching be aimed at, the questions he was asking, should the teaching be aimed at encouraging and facilitating positive, productive, and beneficial use of what comes naturally to the learner, or imposing some other behavioral norms on them? It's a very practical question in many ways, but pedagogically actually quite profound. And I think we should all reflect on that. What is the purpose and objective of teaching? The classroom is a specific, socially constructed space, and that needs to be recognized in these days, because recognizing what is happening outside the norms, the social cultural norms. A classroom is really a very specific, socially constructed space. And in the way we know it in the industrialized Western world, as it were, it is often divorced from the everyday social and community realities of many of our learners, in fact. To what extent should we try to bring the social and sociolinguistic realities of the community in the classroom is one of the questions that is really relevant to this inclusion and social justice agenda. So the concept has since taken off by lots of people, not least by my friend and colleague Ophelia Garcia in her very influential book, Bilingual Education in the 21st Century, A Global Perspective. But of course, there are many others who have taken it beyond education. My colleagues, Angela Crease and Adrian Blackledge, out of a very large project that we were all involved in, looked at translanguaging practices in lots of different contexts. Again, there's extensive literature. If you put it in Google or even Google Scholar, you get literally thousands of hits with the term translanguaging. There's visual arts, there is music, there's transgender studies. I myself have been working, really my original interest in the concept wasn't in education, or wasn't in pedagogy. It was very much about, I was particularly interested in the linguistic innovations of bilingual, multilingual speakers who are mixing languages to create new novel expressions through social media and otherwise. And should they be regarded as innovation and change, as opposed to the assumption that somehow linguistic innovation can only be done by native speakers who have to be monolingual. I mean, there are lots of assumptions in standard sociolinguistics that I was concerned with. I am trained as a variationist sociolinguist, by the way. That's where that interest came out of. I've already mentioned our book really started to kind of led to lots of interest in different fields. But one of the things we wanted to do in the book was to really revisit some of the foundational ideas in linguistics and applied linguistics. For example, Michael Halliday was a highly influential figure in the linguistic field. In the 70s and 80s, when he was still in my current institution, UCL, as a professor of linguistics, really argued for a different perspective on the nature of language. He wrote this very influential book, Language as Social Semiotic, and he was developing this systemic functional linguistics approach. Where he said language is a meaning potential and linguistics is the study of how people exchange meanings by languaging. Again, he was using that concept there. There are, of course, different conceptualizations of the bilingual's linguistic and communicative repertoire. Some would regard it, as we do, as integrated wholes, and others will see it as a set of different codes or modes. And of course, these debates will continue. Nevertheless, the concept is there. So I'm now going to turn to how I think, as I said earlier, none of the people who are operating with the concept translanguaging actually invented it. It was Ken Williams and to some extent Colin Baker. But we're all using it in our own ways. Which I think is great, but of course it does cause some tensions. So I'm going to talk about my take on translanguaging as a pedagogy for inclusion and social justice. And I'm here really suggesting that to do that, we need a different mindset altogether about the education of racialized and minoritized bilingual and multilingual learners. I'm going to use the concept of co-learning. Again, it's a concept that comes from other fields and by other people. I started talking about co-learning almost at the same time as I was writing the book on translanguaging with Ophelia. So, as I said, co-learning is a concept that really came from other disciplines, especially AI and computer simulation, but also used in global security systems and business information management. It refers to a process in which several agents simultaneously try to adapt to each other. In the computer science field, that's really what they were looking at. They try to adapt to each other's behavior so to produce a desirable global outcome that will be shared by the contributing agents. In computational linguistics, we see a lot of that, self-regulated systems and those other things. Researchers of co-learning are interested in the emergence of conventions and evolution of cooperation during that process. Those are not necessarily what I'm interested in, but I found the concept quite interesting. I'm particularly interested in Edward Brandmeier's work on co-learning as a pedagogy or as a pedagogical philosophy. Brandmeier suggested that in the classroom context, co-learning changes the role set of the teacher and the learner from a dispenser and receptacles of knowledge to joint sojourners on the quest of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. The teacher would become a learner facilitator. There are lots of these terms in his writing. A scaffolder, but they're kind of typical educational research concepts. A critical reflection enhancer, while the learner becomes an empowered explorer, a meaning maker, and a responsible knowledge constructor. Bradmeyer definition of these like facilitator, a scaffolder, and critical reflection enhancers all there, and I'm happy to share the PowerPoint. I won't go through these. But the key here is the mutual adaptation. Co-learning is about mutual adaptation of behavior. That is the key to co-learning. In order to achieve desirable learning outcomes, the global outcomes, the teacher and the learner need to constantly monitor each other's behavior, and adapt their action and learn from each other. That's the essence of co-learning. Co-learning in the classroom does not simply involve the teacher in developing strategies to allow equitable participation for all the people in the classroom. It's not quite the same as co-construction, as it were, and really, in those contexts, the teacher still is in charge of everything, organizes everything, and that's not quite what co-learning is about. Co-learning basically is equitable, everybody has the same kind of status. Co-learning requires much unlearning of cultural conditioning, because as Bradmeyer points out, it challenges the traditional authoritative, dominant, and subordinate role sets in schooling environments and the unequal power relations, and that's really, really important, the power relations, in the wider spheres of our world. It empowers the learner and builds on a more genuine community of practice. It moves the teacher and the learner towards a more dynamic and participatory engagement in knowledge, in the process of knowledge construction. And this is all in his book, Pedagogy of Vulnerability. In fact, it builds the confidence in the teacher rather than being kind of vulnerable, but he chose that word for a reason. The characteristics of co-learning relationship in Bradmeyer's conceptualization: all knowledge is valued, reciprocal value of knowledge sharer, care for each other as people and co-learners, trust is absolutely key, and learning from one another. Very, very basic. And the characteristics of a co-learning environment, a classroom environment, be shared power amongst co-learners rather than hierarchical. Social and individualized learning, attending to individuals' needs and background and trajectories. Collective and individual meaning-making and identity exploration. Community practice with situated learning and real-world engagement and action. Bring the outside into the classroom and breaking down the artificial boundaries, or reconceptualize what classroom is about and really looking at it as a social construct. The common values between translanguaging and co-learning are very obvious, at least as I read the literature. All knowledge acquired through all languages and in all cultural contexts should be valued. In an inclusive classroom, co-learning is to show reciprocal value of knowledge sharers. This is paraphrasing the characteristics of co-learning environment that Bradmeyer outlined from a translanguage perspective. Co-learning is to show reciprocal values of knowledge sharers who care for each other as people and as co-learners. Mutual trust is essential, and Bradmeyer's Pedagogy of Vulnerability really outlines all of this. Teachers should open themselves up and contextualize themselves and all selves in societal construct and systems. Again, his words. Co-learning entails admitting one does not know everything and be human, take risks. And in this day and age, teachers must know that. At a press of a button, we get lots of information that really beyond what a teacher can possibly know, and learners can bring in lots of other knowledge information that teachers cannot possibly do. Risks of self-disclosure, we don't know. I didn't know that. You know, a learner might know better. Risks of change, risks not knowing, and risks failing. Translanguaging focuses on valuing all languages and promotes the learning of each other's language and perspectives on the world. Co-learning advocates valuing the knowledge, values, and insights of all involved. Again, very many similarities and shared values. Both advocate creating opportunities of different ways of learning and different ways of talking about learning, but point to the need. Both point to the need to unlearn cultural conditioning and to dismantle the asymmetrical power relations. Co-learning therefore entails the sharing of funds of knowledge, again, well-established concepts, between the teacher and the learner. This kind of funds of knowledge contain really rich cultural and cognitive resources for culturally responsive, meaningful, and effective learning. So teachers and students have much to gain from using these funds of knowledge in the classroom as co-learners, not only to make the classroom more inclusive, but also to engage in real-world learning, meaning-making, and identity exploration. So I was going to, how much time do I have?
20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay. Let me quickly go through two examples. I use them as stories, but they're actually real examples of two teachers from state secondary schools in London. One is an EAL teacher that is English as an additional language. Yeah, I get confused about this. But to me, it's a slightly problematic, actually hugely problematic concept, but anyway, I'm not here to talk about that one. The other one is a modern foreign language MFL teacher teaching Mandarin and German. And in English secondary schools, usually a language teacher is expected to teach two different languages, and this is a very interesting case, a former student of ours, in fact. How they transform their own pedagogical practices as well as their own subjectivities and positioning through co-learning. So this is more about co-learning through translanguaging, of course. The EAL teacher has a great deal of experience teaching refugees and immigrants, both children and adults. Now, her initial position was that EAL pupils needed help. Yeah, as lots of people really believe in that with their English language, because English is an additional language. They come from families where English isn't spoken, or not, at least not as the dominant language. Their English needed to be over a particular threshold. That's again a common belief, or they would fail in the school system. Lots of teachers really strongly, very, very committed to that and really strongly believe in it. So equity and social justice could not be achieved. This is as far as they would argue, without good proficiency in the English language. They really believe in that. So using some words and phrases in their alto would be beneficial. She always tried to speak some other languages to the students, and also used digital dictionaries and Google Translate in her teaching. And she herself is a multilingual, polyglot, and very keen learner of languages. She did not blame the errors her pupils made in English on negative transfer from their L1s, which again, is quite common, but she didn't do that, and described them as cute. She was actually rather interested in the learners' errors or transfers from other languages. She believes that translanguaging is enabling and empowering, but her initial understanding was that she should not only try to use more of their pupils, her pupils' L1s, but also allow them to use more of their L1s themselves. So she gave space and time for the pupils to translate and say something in their own language. So her typical pedagogical practice is, how do you say that in your first language? Again, very positive. But soon she realized one thing, that many of these pupils of refugee and immigrant background do not actually know much about their own language. They're not from that kind of background. So there is an assumption about pupils from refugees and immigrant background who are typically, standardly classified, labeled as English additional language learners. Actually, they don't have their own language, or they don't know enough about their own language to do the kind of translation the teacher was asking them to do, because many of them were in fact born in London and came to the UK they came to the UK when they were very, very young, and the families use English in their own daily interaction, albeit not the kind of standard English one would expect. This teacher attended an online event on pedagogical translanguaging, where it was rather simplistic, not run by us, simplistically and erroneously understood as mixing languages in teaching. Yeah, it's just like that. And became quite worried that translanguaging would lead to semilingualism or not having sufficient knowledge in any of the languages. So she was quite worried, because she was concerned about developing their language proficiency, especially in English. Now, COVID actually changed her view. This was very interesting, because the teacher had a glimpse into the pupils' real lives in the family, because she never had any direct contact with the parents, or definitely not visited any of the pupils' families. But through online learning, she could see a bit of what's happening in the family, because these online sessions gave her the opportunity to observe, there are other kids running around in this household. Parents actually shouting at them in English. She was so surprised. Oh, they spoke English at home. I thought they would be speaking Albanian or some other immigrant languages. So the EAL pupils used a great deal of English at home. English is one of their own languages. It's not just, an additional language. It is an additional language in some sense. So she started to think beyond languages, and that's one of the key arguments that we want to put forward through the concept of translanguages, is to think beyond languages. She started exploring other ways of including, enabling, empowering her pupils, not just through all the languages they know, but other aspects of their lived experience and their other funds of knowledge, as it were. So, for example, she discovered there are some real artists, and she said, oh, they're really arty, because they do all sorts of things outside the classroom and outside the school that she didn't know. And again, this artificial construct of the classroom or even the school, limited the teacher's understanding of the real lives of the pupils she was teaching. She also learned more about the linguistic and racial discriminations her pupils' families actually encountered. Again, in the school context, she never knew any of this. So she even started questioning the term EAL herself as an appropriate for her pupils, and preferred the long-established, actually, alternative term, bilingual and multilingual learners. So there is a bit of movement there in Britain to away from the concept of EAL to bilingual, multilingual learners, which have been used elsewhere. And she invited the so-called real artists to create collage, showing their experiences, their understandings of conflict, of discrimination, of equality, and of social justice. And when the pupils say, "Oh, should I include our language should I include home language? She said, only if, this is her saying, only if they add to the meaning, yeah, what you want to say. You know, if it adds to what you want to say, yes, fine. But, you know, not kind of artificially, just plant a few words from other languages. That is meaningful to you, that helps you to express your feelings. Not tokens. I'm not interested in tokens here. And you know, these words are quite profound. Just very quickly, the other example, the foreign language teacher, again, former student of ours of Italian heritage, but you know, grown up in Britain with a university degree in Chinese. That's why she was teaching Chinese in school, but also German as a German teacher. She did not like the idea of translanguaging at all when she was a student with us. She kind of thinking, you know, this is not going to work. But, you know, nevertheless, you can't really impose it on anybody. She claimed to be a keen supporter of multilingualism, but her understanding of multilingualism was simply having different languages. You know, that is what multilingualism is about. She believed that the more languages one knew, the easier it would be to learn additional languages. Again, quite typical things. Again, she's very focused on improving linguistic proficiency, as it were, and had a strong belief that to improve proficiency, one must maximize the input in the target language. Very kind of typical understanding of what language learning is about. And she literally thought, you know, I've got no time to allow people to use their other languages. I'm teaching these very difficult foreign languages already, and I've got limited time. So in her Mandarin class then, in the school, she happened to have two ethnic Chinese students, one British born and one came from Hong Kong, very, very young, didn't have the language, as it were, that is associated with their ethnicity. She actually found it quite awkward to begin with to allow these pupils in her class. She didn't feel comfortable because she just thought, oh, you're Chinese. You know, I'm here to teach Chinese to others, not to actual Chinese people. So she kind of, you know, that perspective on language and ethnicity and all the rest of it, quite interesting there. She assumed that since they were ethnic Chinese, you know, some form of Chinese must have been spoken at home, which is true. You know, some forms of Chinese was spoken, but not the school language that she was teaching, not Mandarin. And there is more information about these two pupils that I won't go into because I'm running out of time. So she took the initiative to find out a bit more about these two pupils because it bothered her. It bothered her. She didn't know how to handle these two alongside the others. She wanted to know more. She's a very conscientious teacher, of course. She realized that they had the wrong knowledge in a way. One spoke Shanghainese, one is, you know, the Hong Kong girl, of course, this Cantonese at home, not Mandarin. And she sought advice on positive transfer. She probably heard us talking about why is transfer always negative. You know, L1 is always the cause of errors when you learn another language. So she came back. I mean, she's a practicing teacher, an experienced one now. She came back to us. Now, we had a long kind of session trying to reflect on the whole concept of transfer, whether it works or not at all, whether such thing exists. So after that session, she began to explore alternatives, starting by not treating these students as learners of foreign languages, but as bilinguals and multilinguals who have Chinese, some form of Chinese, in their linguistic repertoire already. And how do we make better use of what they know already, their funds of knowledge, their linguistic repertoire, and more positively in the process of learning. Very much in the same spirit as Ken Williams did in the original conceptualization of translanguaging. The boy considers English as his best language, in fact, not really a Chinese speaker. He didn't regard himself as that, because he could not read or write Chinese. And for Chinese users, not being able to read or write the language, the script, is basically an indicator that you're not a real user of that language. So there are other things I could say. The girl feeling very comfortable in Cantonese and speaks it with her parents at home, but she also considers English as her primary language because outside home she really has very limited opportunity to use Cantonese, so she mainly operates in English. The teacher read we asked her to read about Brett Meyer's Pedagogy of Vulnerability, and she actually admitted, as a heritage speaker of Italian herself, you know, she's got that interesting background. She did not always get the pronunciation or vocabulary or grammar of Italian right, you know, because she's not that kind of speaker. So she empathized with these heritage language speakers, and as a non-native speaker of Chinese, but she's a Chinese teacher, her own writing of Chinese characters was also, you know, actually she admitted not much better than these two pupils. So again, you know, she started exploring the connections between language learning and other aspects of the students' lives. Both of these pupils happen to be very talented musicians, and she herself was one. So the teacher really, you know, started using that aspects of their lives and asked them to create songs with lyrics in all the languages that they know and perform something about their lives. So that was a step change for her. In fact, she started reposition herself as a co-learner by actively listening to the pupils' own stories. She connected her pupils' lived experience with her own lived experience as an Italian heritage speaker in Britain and a teacher of Mandarin Chinese. She began to break the ethno-linguistic categories that do not really reflect the complexities of her students or her own lived experiences. She started connecting her colleagues at staff meetings, correcting her colleagues at staff meetings when they use labels such as the Indian girl, you know, or the Brazilian boy. She really critically reflected on all of this and encouraged her students to highlight the complex multilingual lives in school science. And she really quite, creative in the way she handles these assignments. Like the EAL teacher, she now feels much more confident to give space, creating and give space to the students by encouraging them to bring their own voices and their symbolic and semiotic selves into the classroom. So again, I want to end with a quote from this teacher. She says, translanguage pedagogy, I mean, she now talks about translanguage pedagogy to other teachers in training teachers. So she says, translanguage pedagogy is about accepting and respecting bilingual pupils as they are, from their own lived experiences, their own identities, use of language, and ability to be creative and critical, and not from the external racial linguistic perspectives and categories. We never expected her to say these things. This is very much the same line as Ken Williams originally suggested. So again, that's a real transformation, and it's a process. What these two teachers went through is a process of transpositioning, a process where participants break from their preset or prescribed roles and switch perspectives with others through translanguaging and transmodal communication and through co-learning. This is very much an outcome of the process of co-learning. By releasing oneself from conventions and fostering a greater sense of possibility freeing ourselves from habitual thinking, conventional thinking, through unlearning of the cultural conditioning, and building empathy with others involved in the process. This is, our kind of definition of transpositioning, as Maggie Hawkins, with whom I'm working on this idea of transpositioning, says, it's multiple and interwoven layers of emplacements and positionings that are entailed in communication, which cross and transcend the boundaries that have historically shaped our thinking about the worlds and their inhabitants. So the two examples the two example teachers have a transposition from simplistic understanding of translanguaging as allowing the mixture of named languages in the classroom to what Garcia and others have talked about, that translanguaging stance. It's that shifting of stance, a perspective that views bilingual learners' linguistic practices and their racial ethnic identities together. So they started to viewing teaching as co-learning, because the process of teaching and learning are together. So conclusion, very quickly, translanguaging originated from an agentive learner perspective and strategy, and that's important to remember, often misinterpreted through a double monolingual and monoglossic ideology. Just having different languages side by side is enough. It isn't. Whilst recognizing their multilingualism as having multiple named languages is an important first step in supporting these learners of diverse linguistic and cultural background, it actually leaves intact the racial linguistic ideologies that are behind the monolingual and monoglossic ethos, policies, and practices. That's what translanguaging really wants to challenge. So returning to the very practical questions that I started with about translanguaging is about bringing linguistic repertoires to bear in classroom and countering monolingual policies, including the one language only or one language at a time policies. It is about having sound pedagogies, very basic sound pedagogies, good pedagogies to use time effectively and to achieve teaching and learning objectives, of course. And translanguaging pedagogy is to create space to counter institutionalized monolingualism in linguistically diverse classrooms, not only to introduce flexible translingual practices, but also complex semiotic flows by design. More importantly, by prioritizing the learners through bringing their personal trajectories, perspectives, and voices into the classroom activities and into learning, by opening up the space, the classroom as a space for everybody to engage in learning, teaching, and growing together. The classroom becomes a socially responsive space to the histories of the individual students. And by opening up the classroom to the students' background and out-of-class lives, out-of-school lives, the curriculum then becomes a rich space, also a translanguaging space where every history and every identity can be presented, celebrated, and explored. Following Williams' recognition of students as attentive, teachers must learn to trust that students will can take responsibility of their learning according to their own particularities and knowledge systems. The teaching and learning objectives should then be jointly set by the teachers and learners together. It's that togetherness, it's that integrated whole that we really want to push. The teachers must be prepared to unlearn and be vulnerable, in Brian Meyer's terms, and to become co-learners and joint sojourners on a journey that will transform their own lives, subjectivities, and positionings, as well as the pupils. co-learning and transpositioning are two driving forces for inclusion and social justice in the classroom and in rejecting what we have called abyssal thinking in the language and education of racialized bilingual learners. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup à Li Wei pour cette très intéressante présentation. Many thanks for your presentation. Alors maintenant, je vais proposer une réponse à professeur Li Wei et ensuite, bien entendu, le public pourra poser toutes ces questions. Donc, déjà, je voulais aussi nous excuser au nom de l'équipe pour parfois les problématiques de traduction. Vous avez vu en français, c'est très compliqué. Alors, merci à tous les étudiants, doctorants, masterants qui nous ont étudiés, qui nous ont aidés à faire la traduction. Et évidemment, il y a des choses qui sont approximatives parce que les concepts aussi sont probablement à rediscuter dans la traduction. Donc voilà, mais c'était une façon pour vous d'atteindre aussi une forme de compréhension. Donc voilà. Alors je vais répondre à Li Wei en français, mais mon diaporama, my slideshow is in English, so you can just turn over there and you will have d'abord les remerciements, parce que comme je vous le disais en préambule, je pense que là on a un accès direct à cette conceptualisation du translanguaging. Donc pour nous c'est une grande opportunité. On n'a pas vraiment la chance de discuter avec les collègues qui ont travaillé sur cette conceptualisation. Et puis, vous avez vraiment fait l'effort, Li Wei, d'épistémologiser la notion en reparlant de St. Williams, de ce qui s'est passé effectivement au Pays de Galles. Et puis, moi, j'ai beaucoup aimé, vous avez proposé aussi du corpus avec des actions concrètes et avec ce que vous avez dit, le changement de mindset de l'enseignant, comment effectivement il y a un changement aussi de pratique. Donc véritablement vous nous avez offert une proposition autour de la pédagogie. Donc je suis très contente qu'on rentre de plein pied dans la conférence aussi par la pédagogie. Alors c'est vrai que dans notre monde francophone on parle plus de didactique que de pédagogie. La pédagogie, c'est pour la classe, mais je sais que didactique, dans le monde anglophone, c'est plutôt l'inverse, c'est plutôt perçu comme quelque chose qui est assez, qui n'est pas forcément une notion qui est traitée telle que, donc on va parler de pédagogie, mais je trouve que là on a aussi une mise en abîme que nous on appellerait didactique en fait dans le monde francophone, dans ce que vous avez proposé, donc à la fois de la pédagogie, à la fois de la didactique, donc merci beaucoup. Et puis un double mouvement, vous avez montré comment vous êtes allé des théories vers le fait de former les enseignants, puis ensuite les enseignants ont fait évoluer les pratiques. Et puis ce double mouvement aussi, alors Jean-Louis Schiss dira un mouvement ascendant, c'est-à-dire qu'à un moment donné aussi, les enseignants, par effet de discussion avec les collègues, font aussi évoluer les pratiques de classe. Donc ça, je trouve que c'était très intéressant de le montrer, donc merci beaucoup. Alors, évidemment, l'idée, c'est de discuter et de créer des liens entre les présentations. Donc, comme je vous le disais en préambule, nous, on s'inscrit plutôt là, dans notre unité de recherche sur un paradigme de la complexité, donc plutôt éviter les oppositions binaires. Alors, évidemment, on peut ne pas être d'accord, on peut contester, bien entendu, ça fait partie aussi de la vie, j'ai envie de dire de la recherche, mais nous, ce qui nous intéresse aussi, c'est de mettre en abîme et de comprendre ce qu'il y a derrière les concepts. C'est la raison pour laquelle, avec ma collègue Gail Prasad et Emmanuel Le Pichon-Wortsman au Canada, quand Gail Prasad avait fini son doctorat qu'elle a fait avec Jim Cummins, et puis donc une partie ici à Montpellier avec moi, eh bien, on avait des difficultés à se comprendre sur les notions. Vous voyez, pédagogie, didactique, translanguaging, and so on. Et en fait, on s'est rendu compte que tout vient de l'histoire aussi des chercheurs, de comment ils ont été formés, comment finalement ils ont fait évoluer leurs concepts, comment ils en ont repris certains, on voit bien avec le concept du translanguaging de St. Williams, et puis comment ça résonne ou pas, ou jusqu'à quel point avec nous, nos contextes, ou ce qu'on travaille, ou les notions avec lesquelles on travaille. Donc c'est la raison pour laquelle on a fait ce livre. On a demandé aux chercheurs de donner des éléments de leur biographie langagière. Donc d'ailleurs, il y a Ophélia Garcia qui a fait aussi un papier, un chapitre dans cet ouvrage. Et puis pour montrer finalement comment ils se sont emparés de certains concepts et quelles sont les idées qu'ils défendent finalement. Et que nous, quand on les reçoit, parfois ça peut être un petit peu troublant et déstabilisant, mais quand on le remet dans le contexte, quand on revient à l'histoire aussi des chercheurs, il y a des éléments de compréhension, je trouve, qui sont intéressants pour une mise en perspective. Et en tout cas, ce qu'on a vu dans cette trajectoire de chercheurs, c'est qu'il y a quand même un point commun, c'est qu'il y a une forme de geste d'indignation, quand on reprend les études de Moscovici en sociologie, c'est-à-dire qu'à un moment donné, on a envie, par rapport à ces questions de langue, de défendre quelque chose. Donc ça me... Mais alors, on défend tous quelque chose, mais pas forcément de la même manière, et pas forcément avec la même histoire, mais ça nous a beaucoup intéressés. Et puis, de comprendre aussi que on a parlé des espaces, mais aussi selon les temporalités. Selon le... Alors, en ce moment, donc Sam Williams a parlé de translanguaging. Après, c'est revenu, j'ai envie de dire, par vos travaux. Et puis, est-ce que le monde francophone va s'en emparer? Comment ça va fonctionner, etc. Et on voit bien aussi que c'est une question de temps. Et c'est le temps aussi qui nous dira comment les notions vont voyager et les pratiques aussi des enseignants vont être impactées. Donc ça, je trouve ça très intéressant. Alors, il y a quand même des choses, ce qui se passe autour du translanguaging. Il y a le dernier numéro de l'IDIL, Sophie Babot, qui est avec nous, je ne sais pas si elle est déjà arrivée, avec sa collègue Margaret Bento, qui ont fait justement un numéro de l'IDIL sur les pratiques translangagières. Alors, c'est pas tout à fait translanguaging, mais justement, toute la discussion, alors il y a une postface de Ophélia Garcia, c'est comment on appréhende ces pratiques translangagières, qu'est-ce qu'on met derrière finalement ces notions. Alors, vous connaissez peut-être aussi le concept de translangageance de Joel Aden, repris par Sandrine Echanova, qui est aussi avec nous. Alors, c'est différent quand même, parce que là, on parle de la multimodalité, de la médiation, et c'est derrière les théories de Varela et de l'énaction, donc je pense que c'est pas exactement, alors là, en 15 minutes, je peux pas rentrer dans les détails, mais c'est pour vous dire que, vous voyez, aussi nous, les chercheurs, on est attirés par certaines notions, mais comment on les retravaille. Donc je pense que c'est ça aussi, notre travail de chercheur, de s'intéresser à ça et de savoir de quoi on discute réellement. Ça me semble primordial. Alors évidemment, on pourrait faire des liens avec nous, ce qu'on appelle les approches plurielles, notamment en Europe, donc avec l'éveil aux langues, language awareness, mais qui vient aussi de Hawkins, donc qui a été récupéré, beaucoup mis en œuvre par notre collègue Michel Candelier. Et puis, bien entendu, dans les approches plurielles, on met aussi les approches interculturelles, on parle de l'intercompréhension entre langues parentes et aussi de ce qu'on appelle CLIL-EMIL, donc l'enseignement des langues au travers d'un contenu spécifique, disciplinaire. Donc on a un chapeau qui est quand même très très varié. Moi, si je reprenais ce chapeau, voilà, alors ça c'est vraiment ma façon de travailler, je mettrais les approches interculturelles comme étant un cadre. En tout cas, moi c'est comme ça que je travaille. Mais vous voyez, chaque chercheur, selon aussi sa formation et ses intérêts, va reproblématiser en fait ces éléments notionnels. Donc ça, je trouve que c'est très intéressant. Et ce qui m'a aussi beaucoup passionné, c'est que finalement, on a beaucoup de corpus communs avec des enseignants qui disent « mais j'ai plein de langues dans ma classe, j'ai pas le temps, qu'est-ce que je fais avec ce multilinguisme ?» Donc ça revient. Et je trouve que probablement, dans tout ce qu'on essaye de mettre en œuvre, on essaye de dépasser cette question de on n'a pas le temps et puis on ne connaît pas les langues de nos élèves, donc comment on va pouvoir les aider? Alors, dans d'autres études qu'on a pu faire, alors là je vous ai mis un livre aussi qu'on a sorti l'année dernière avec ma collègue Emmanuelle Lepichon-Wortsman, où on a pu montrer que parfois, au contraire, c'était contre-productif quand les enseignants connaissaient les langues des élèves, parce que parfois, ils pouvaient avoir des attitudes plus normatives, en disant « Ah ben là, il a dit panja en arabe dialectal, mais il aurait mieux fait d'utiliser de l'arabe classique, alors qu'en fait, panja et ponge, c'est quand même pratique pour associer et mémoriser le mot en français. » Donc voilà, ça, c'est des choses que je retrouve très en commun avec ce que vous avez montré aujourd'hui. Et puis, bien entendu, la question des idéologies. Donc, on aura une belle conférence de Jean Louchy sur les idéologies autour du plurilinguisme aussi. C'est que, attention, évidemment, il y a des idéologies qui sont liées aussi aux notions qu'on propose et qui sont liées aussi à des publics. Moi, je suis quand même frappée de voir que, alors on a Daniel Véronique dans la salle, donc on est très content qu'il soit là, qui a travaillé beaucoup sur cette interface acquisition et aussi didactique, mais c'est encore des interfaces qu'on a du mal à travailler. Hein, alors qu'en réalité, comme vous l'avez très bien dit, il ne faudrait pas qu'il y ait une coupure entre les pratiques langagières en dehors de l'école et puis ce qui se passe à l'école. D'accord ? Donc voilà, mais vous voyez que même nous en recherche, on a du mal à faire travailler les chercheurs ensemble. Même chose par rapport à des publics. On va avoir des chercheurs qui vont se spécialiser entre guillemets sur les publics migrants, d'autres sur CLIL. Alors qu'en réalité, c'est toujours l'idée quand même d'enseigner ou d'apprendre une langue au travers d'un contenu disciplinaire. Est-ce qu'on ne peut pas mettre ces éléments en commun ? Et on voit qu'on a aussi des difficultés à le faire. Bon, parce que aussi c'est vaste, il y a beaucoup de publications. Voilà, donc ça c'est intéressant. Donc je reprends votre... I quoted a bit from your slideshow, et qu'effectivement, on a ces questions aussi de s'intéresser au public minorisé, notamment sur ces questions de multilinguisme, et puis les questions, vous avez parlé de ratio linguistique. Alors, la problématique, c'est, alors là je parle pour la France, c'est que nous on a du mal à conceptualiser à partir de notions comme race, la race. Hein, c'est vraiment quelque chose qui est au contraire tabou, puisque nous, c'est racisme, c'est comme le communautarisme en français. Community, c'est positif dans le monde anglophone, alors que nous, on va dire, l'idée de communauté, c'est souvent le communautarisme, ce sera quelque chose vécu comme négatif. Donc je pense que, voilà, on n'en est pas du tout aux mêmes phases au niveau des idéologies, au niveau politique. Moi, je me souviens quand Jim Cummins nous demandait comment vous traduisez identity text, j'ai dit, mais si je le traduis par texte identitaire, l'identité de l'élève, alors ça, il faudrait en parler à nos collègues de l'institution, mais c'est quelque chose qui est... voilà, on parle de métier d'élève, par exemple, dans les programmes en France, et pas de son identité en tant que telle. Donc, vous voyez, là, vraiment, je pense que c'est très intéressant, je vous donne la perspective qu'on peut avoir dans d'autres situations, et que nous, on est plutôt sur liberté, égalité, fraternité, sur la laïcité aussi. Donc, tous ces concepts autour de ratio linguistique, ça ne veut pas dire que ça n'existe pas. Ça veut dire qu'au niveau de la recherche, on n'en est pas exactement, évidemment, aux mêmes phases de problématisation. Et bien entendu, on est quand même tous en quête de social justice. Alors nous, on va plutôt parler d'équité, il me semble, dans nos travaux. Effectivement, l'idée, c'est l'inclusion. Alors par contre, l'inclusion, ça c'est dans les nouvelles circulaires, nouveaux programmes de l'éducation nationale. On parle de l'inclusion des élèves, alors en situation de handicap, en situation de multilinguisme. Et puis, effectivement, l'idée, c'est de travailler sur toutes ces représentations à différents niveaux. Donc, à des niveaux, on l'a vu, de l'enseignement aux enseignants, de leur formation, mais aussi au niveau de l'information auprès des décideurs. Donc, en France, par exemple, depuis 1 an et demi, il y a un Conseil supérieur des langues pour faire travailler les langues régionales avec les langues anciennes, les langues vivantes, pour la maîtrise du français, et aussi en prenant en compte les langues des élèves. Donc ça, ce serait vraiment intéressant d'y parvenir. Et là, il y a des éléments politiques pour justement travailler sur une justice sociale. Je pense que ça, on est à peu près tous d'accord au moins sur ce point. Alors, des éléments de réflexion pour la suite. Je pense que, voilà, travailler sur les questions de inclusion, exclusion. La question aussi de mettre l'humain au cœur des enjeux. On a beaucoup parlé, alors là je mets le livre justement de Jean-Claude Béaco, Jean-Louis Schiss, Francine Sucurel et Daniel Véronique sur les cultures éducatives et linguistiques dans l'enseignement des langues. C'est que, voilà, selon les formations des enseignants, on n'est pas forcément sur les mêmes cultures éducatives. Et ça, c'est intéressant à prendre en compte parce que, effectivement, quand vous avez dit leeway who's teaching whom, eh bien, est-ce qu'on est prêt à reconnaître que les étudiants, les élèves eux-mêmes peuvent nous élever? Alors là, je cite mon collègue, Frédéric Miquel, qui a fait un livre admirable et qui mène un projet sur ces élèves qui nous élèvent, comment les élèves aussi peuvent nous faire changer de mindset. Donc, en fait, c'est proche de ce que vous avez montré. Je trouve que c'est intéressant de voir qu'il y a ce point de convergence. Et puis, on parle de l'école de la confiance en France. Vous avez parlé de confiance. Évidemment, enfin, moi je suis analyste de discours aussi de formation, donc quand on parle de quelque chose, c'est que par dialogisme, ça n'existe pas forcément encore. Donc si on a mis en œuvre une école de la confiance, ça veut dire qu'on aimerait restaurer ou établir de la confiance, mais ça ne veut pas dire qu'on est arrivé à ce point, d'accord? Mais en tout cas, donc il y a beaucoup de choses par rapport à ce que vous avez dit sur transposition, cooperation, and so on. Voilà. Alors, évidemment, ça voudrait dire qu'on essaye de travailler sous forme de communauté d'apprentissage. Donc, les élèves apprennent, mais nous aussi, les enseignants, on est là pour apprendre avec eux. Donc, ça, c'est un nouveau changement aussi de paradigme. Est-ce qu'on est prêt à ça? Quand on voit que dans nos programmes, notamment en France, on est sur la maîtrise de la langue, on est sur beaucoup d'éléments de maîtrise, et ben là, ça veut dire qu'on se laisse justement déstabiliser. C'est pour ça que moi, je me réfère beaucoup à l'interculturel, mais le point de déstabilisation, c'est le point de redémarrage pour une réorganisation des représentations. Donc ça me semble vraiment intéressant. Voilà, donc si ça vous intéresse, on mène des projets Sirius, éducation et migration au niveau européen sur ces questions. Et puis, vous pourrez voir aussi que l'idée, donc vous avez vu qu'on est sur une idée de fluidité, de trans, donc pour s'opposer peut-être à un produit, j'ai envie de dire, qui est attendu dans nos normes scolaires, c'est-à-dire qu'on attend un produit fini dans les évaluations finalement sommatives. Et quand les enseignants nous disent on n'a pas le temps, c'est parce qu'en fait, ils n'ont pas le temps de mettre en place un processus. Donc tout ce que vous avez montré, moi je trouve que c'est de la didactique générale, c'est même au-delà du plurilinguisme. Mais vos observations, on les fait aussi sur nos terrains. C'est-à-dire que des fois, ce n'est pas le problème de la langue ou du multilinguisme ou du plurilinguisme, c'est un problème de didactique générale. Est-ce qu'on s'intéresse aux pratiques langagières? Comment on considère son rôle en tant qu'enseignant? Alors est-ce que finalement, alors moi c'est ce que j'ai appelé très modestement, on n'est pas aussi dans des pratiques qu'on pourrait dire plutôt pan-langagières, c'est-à-dire qu'on prend tous ces éléments comme un tout, pas uniquement la langue, pas uniquement la fluidité, mais aussi le contexte, les familles, la documentation qu'on peut avoir dans la salle de classe, ce qui se passe dans l'environnement en dehors de la classe. Là, je me fais siffler. Il faut que j'arrête. Donc, merci beaucoup. Et quelques mots. Évidemment, je vous laisse la parole pour quelques instants pour discuter avec Li Wei. Et ensuite, on va discuter autour d'un café. Donc, évidemment, avec professeur Li Wei, vous pourrez discuter autour d'un café. Et les gens qui s'inquiètent pour leur poster, on vous emmènera mettre le poster. Donc, professeur Li Wei, c'est à vous si vous avez quelques questions à poser.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Could you understand?
Well,
Not all, but yeah, of course.
So it's,
Alors, est-ce que vous avez quelques questions? Oui, une question.
It's not a question, it's more like a comment, but first of all, thank you very much for an inspiring lecture and an inspiring discussion and feedback. I was really impressed by those two teachers in terms of their mindset and in terms of their ability to learn from their learners. And I think in terms of teacher education, we need to think of all kinds of ways of training teachers or educating teachers to learn from their students. And I'm also in teacher education, and I think we don't really do that enough. I mean, I do research on teacher learning, and we talk about different sources of learning and different aspects of lifelong learning, like learning on the job. But this is really an important aspect that should be included in teacher education programs. Because I'm not sure that these teachers represent the norm or the majority of teachers.
You're absolutely right. You're really, really right. Thank you so much for that comment. That's really to the point. I think we have a system and institutional challenge because at least as far as I know in the English teacher training programs, there's absolutely no space, no time or space for that kind of development. These teachers are in-service teachers, they're experienced teachers. They've created a bit of time for themselves, and they really are keen because they're dealing with individuals, real-life cases. So they've decided also to engage with the students. And of course, the COVID pandemic also gave them rather paradoxically, an opportunity to really get into the lives of these individual pupils. But to put it in the teacher training, teacher education system is the way forward. But we are a long way from that. But thank you for pointing that out.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'il y a vraiment une question encore avant qu'on aille prendre le café? Oui.
It doesn't become a hindrance rather than an entrance to foreign language learning. And another thing I'm thinking of, from my research, I found out that the context in Africa is quite different from all that we've been discussing here. So how do we go about that? I know it might take a long time, but just throw some light on this.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's a very, very important question, and it's actually asked more frequently than one thought. But there is no simple answer to that question. Perhaps the simplest answer is translanguaging is not meant to be a language teaching pedagogy, a point that I made earlier. It is about supporting the lives of multilingual learners, supporting their learning overall, not about developing linguistic proficiency in any particular language. I think that needs to be really, really emphasized. So it's not mistaken, oh, this is a way of teaching language. No, it isn't at all. It's never meant to be. And if the focus is purely on improving the learner's linguistic proficiency, which I would debate about anyway, but say if that is the purpose, then translanguaging isn't going to help you. Yeah, but it's going to help you in many other ways. Ultimately, it could help, but it's not meant to be a language teaching method.
Thank you very much. So, je vous propose d'aller poursuivre la conversation autour d'un café, bien sûr.